Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit, and this is Why We Can't Have Nice Things. For those of you who don't know, this is a rather irregular series I like to do every now and again. And by that, I mean I've slacked off and haven't done it in ages. This is having a look at a game that did not sell very well. Having a look at why it didn't sell very well, the history behind it and its company, and then, of course, why you should pay attention to it. This time around, we're going to be having a look at the PlayStation 2 game God Hand. This was the last game released by the company Clover Studios, who are known best perhaps for the Beautiful Joe series, and the action-adventure game in which you play a godlike wolf by the name of Akami. This was Clover Studios' last game. After the release of this game, they were shut down by their majority shareholder and their publisher, Capcom. They had this to say on the issue: Clover Studio has met the goal of developing unique and creative original home video game software. However, in view of promoting a business strategy that concentrates management resources on a selected business to enhance the efficiency of the development power of the entire Capcom group, the dissolution of Clover Studios Co. Limited has been raised and passed at a board of directors meeting. It's really as simple as that. So, they made good games, but good games aren't enough to survive within the industry, especially when they're not selling very well, and as a result, they were wrapped up and kicked the hell out. Now, a lot of the Clover Studios guys went on to form a company called Seed, which later became Platinum Games, who released games like Bayonetta, Vanquish, and Infinite Space. Now, many will argue that their best game was in fact Akami. I'm not entirely sure that that's true, because God Hand holds a very special place in my heart. Now, you might ask, why exactly did it fail? Well, this was probably one of the reasons. The IGN review of God Hand is one of the most criticized reviews to have ever come out for any game. It has been blasted across the board as an absolutely awful piece of writing. It's not even spell-checked to this very day, and that review came out in 2006. Please note, incredibly. Yes, what an amazing word that is. Now, perhaps I give IGN too much credit in that regard, but it certainly can't have helped. Unfortunately, the game did not get the marketing it required. It got some reasonable critic reviews, but wasn't sold properly, and eventually fell flat on its face. I would now like to show you why that was a crime, and why you should pay attention to this game, which is now available on the PlayStation Network, so you can play it once again. For those curious, I'm playing this on a PlayStation 2 emulator on my PC. It was just easier than hooking up the PS3 to the capture card. Now, I'd like to begin my presentation by essentially showing you what God Hand is in a nutshell, and this scene should give you just a little bit of an idea.
Hey! Sweetie! You're not going anywhere until you answer our quiz question! He's such a sexy man! Just my type!
I'm not that kind of guy.
Question time, sweet cheeks. What's the name of our boss? Elvis! E-L-V-I-S!
Like I give a shit.
Unfortunately, time's up, baby. Aww.
Yes, basically that. So this entire game is flat out nonsensical in almost every respect. There is a plot underlying it, but the characterization of everything within this world is very, very odd indeed. Even the basic thugs has some very interesting things to say that don't really make a huge amount of sense until you really pay attention to what's actually going on in the world. Assuming you can see that through all of the brawling and the punching and the fighting and the screaming and the bleeding. So this game is essentially a third-person brawler. Now that's a very odd choice, because while third-person brawlers have been done, they haven't been done from directly behind the character. There's a reason for that. Usually because that's a bad idea. Controlling a brawler requires very precise awareness of what's going on within the game world, otherwise you will lose. It will be horrible. Now, in theory, something like this should be very difficult to play as a result of bad camera controls, but while it starts off feeling very, very odd indeed and cumbersome and clunky, once you get to grips with it, it is actually quite the opposite. It is an incredibly fluid movement and fighting system, even though it seems at the start that you can barely control which direction your character is actually going in. Now that in itself is an impressive thing, but what I believe is more impressive is the way that they dealt with difficulty in this game. This game has an adaptive difficulty system. You can see it down the bottom there. And I'm going to show you just how difficult this game can actually get. by losing horribly at this boss fight to start with. Now, you may notice that one hit took off about a quarter of my life there. Yeah, that's fairly standard. Admittedly, there are even bigger hits that can take off even more. You die very, very fast in this game. You can't take an awful lot of punishment, and you can't block. You have to dodge everything that comes in your direction. And if you're not situationally aware of where everyone is on the screen, and usually you do that by making use of the radar in the top right, then you will die horribly. Over and over and over again. You see, God Hand is fairly legendary in terms of its difficulty. This is on normal difficulty. This is one of the first bosses in the game. And I'm currently on difficulty level 2 of 4. Now, the more damage you do, without taking damage yourself, the higher your difficulty level goes. If you take too much damage, you will actually level down, and that makes the game easier. So the game adapts to how well you perform. If you're able to dispatch enemies in the harder difficulty numbers, then you will be able to gain additional bonuses. If you can't, then you will be stuck right back on level 1. Alternatively, you will just die horribly because enemies hit harder, they're faster, they react better to you, and, well, yeah, they annihilate you. They are very, very good at that. I'd say this is easily the easiest boss in the game, and that's to be expected, bearing in mind it is in the first area. Now, how does the fighting system actually work? Well, you have a number of different combo abilities. Now, these combos actually consist of moves which you acquire during the game. You learn techniques, which you can then link together. This is done within the pause menu, and you can set up a main combo on the square button, as well as a variety of different moves for different button combinations. And generally speaking, you want to create a combo that actually makes sense, depending on your playstyle. Do you want a lot of big, hard-hitting moves? Do you want certain attributes in your moves? For instance, do you want a juggle move in the middle of your combo? You can do that. Do you want a move that has a guard break, but might not do as much damage? Do you want a move that is longer, does more damage, or shorter, a combination move, so that you get more hits in, so you're more likely to stun your opponent? Well, you can pretty much figure that out for yourself, and you build a combination throughout the game by acquiring these moves. Either you find them in the game, or you can actually spend money at a store in order to acquire them. And then things like that happen. Introducing the God Hand. The God Hand is your right arm. It is essentially the power of a god in your right arm, and you can build up a tension meter to allow you to unleash the God Hand at any time. When you do so, you essentially become invulnerable, and you can beat the snot out of anything for a very small, limited period of time. It's kinda neat. That still doesn't explain why the fighting system in this game is so good. The fighting system in this game is so good because it ties in to the other thing which this game does very, very well, which is difficulty and fairness. Now, this is not a term that was really used all that much back when this game first came out in 2006. Fair difficulty. Difficulty was often very unfair. In terms of classic games on previous generation consoles, hard games were generally just there to be difficult and artificially elongate the experience through frustrating nonsense. Death traps, blind falls, things that you couldn't anticipate. It was all trial and error. This game, on the other hand, is all about fairness in its difficulty. It is not going to throw anything at you that you cannot handle, and if you don't handle it, then that's because you suck. The game gives you all the tools from the outset to dodge every attack, to never take damage at any point during the game if you are good enough. But are you good enough? Chances are no. At the start, you very much are not good enough by any stretch of the imagination. Now, the game isn't unreasonable. If you do well enough, you'll get enough gold to be able to buy new abilities as well as buy power-ups, like increased HP, increased tension, extra attacks, and things like that. You can see a wide variety of different attacks going on there, which you can purchase and then add to your techniques combo list. You can also sell existing techniques that you don't use if you need a little bit extra cash. There's also a casino here. No, seriously, there's a casino. I think this is probably where I spent the bulk of my time when I was playing through this originally. I did beat it, and I was fairly happy to do so because it took me about a week to beat the final boss, and I was in a lot of pain while doing so. You really have to hit those buttons pretty damn hard. The aching. But here you can gamble away all of your money and completely waste your time. Especially if you're playing video poker, because that is a nightmare. Blackjack, yeah, can do fairly well on that. Video poker, not so much. But it is a good way of building up quite a lot of money, as well as having a little bit of a break between encounters. The other way to earn money is to go into the fighting arena, which is not remotely easy in any way. There's 40 or so challenges for that, And if you beat them all, then you do get a special reward, but yeah, good luck with that. It doesn't mess around. That's a good way of summing up the entire game, actually. It's a game that doesn't mess around. Even the basic enemies are a big threat to you. They can do an awful lot of damage, especially if they happen to have acquired a weapon of some kind. If you're not paying attention and one of them hits you very hard and ends up staggering you, then you're in a lot of trouble. But you always have the means to dodge. I mentioned earlier that you can't block in this game. That's true, but you can dodge. You can duck and weave, you can do backflips, and you can also dash left to right. This will allow you to avoid every attack in the game. There's really no excuse whatsoever for being hit unless you are simply not good enough. And the game constantly proves that to you over and over again. It is very, very firm. It is fair, but it is firm. It will punish you for doing badly, but it will reward you with a fantastic, meaty, and completely over-the-top combat system if you are doing well. That's the funny thing about it, isn't it? It's a constant challenge, and players that are looking for a constant challenge will enjoy the way that the difficulty system actually works. The fact that it is getting consistently harder and harder and harder, they will want to maintain their level. They will not want to drop back down to level 1. Indeed, there is a way to do that. You can actually grovel in front of the enemies in order to reduce your level back to 1. It's humiliating. You don't want that. You want to succeed at the harder difficulty levels, and the game does allow you to do that if you don't suck. I feel it's only recently that a large number of people have been looking for this kind of challenge. I think it's since Demon's Souls and Dark Souls have enjoyed such commercial success, and of course the rise of YouTube playthroughs of things like Kaizo Mario World and I Want to Be the Guy and Happy Wheels and nonsense like that, that players are really genuinely looking for a challenge, and when this game came out, that is not what they were looking for at all. Did that put people off? Well, I don't imagine that it did all that much, but it didn't help. Not by any stretch of the imagination, because this game kicks your ass over and over again. This came out before Demon's Souls. I'm not going to say that it was the predecessor, because that's silly. That same company came up with a series called Kingsfield that was out way before that. But it has the same kind of difficulty as Demon's Souls, only Demon's Souls does dickish things to you, but gives you warnings. This game never really does dickish things to you. You're not going to fall into death traps and be tricked at any point during this game. It's all forthright. It's a very honest, a brutally honest game. You get into this, and you are confronted by creatures that are extremely powerful and can kill you in a couple of hits. And every time the game says, you are totally capable of dealing with this. We gave you the tools, why didn't you use them? A bad workman always blames his tools, and when you start off with this game, you will be a bad workman. Some people will not be able to accept that, and as a result, they will absolutely despise the game. For me, after I got past the initial rage, I absolutely loved it. Then I got my second wind and found yet more rage for the game, and that rage continued all the way through to the final boss. But my god, was that satisfying. Oh my, it was. It was one of the most satisfying experiences I think I've ever had with gaming. It's one of the hardest games that I've ever had the time or the inclination to actually beat, and it was worth it. Absolutely 100% worth it. There's plenty more things that I really like about this game. The complete and total abject offensiveness of it. The first boss fight, a ridiculous stereotype. There's far more than that. Far, far more. Nothing is sacred in this game. Nothing at all. From the offensive to the obviously absurd. This game really does actually have it all. You got fat Mexican demons, you've got dominatrix, you've got midgets, you have flaming circus acrobats, poison chihuahuas, you pretty much name it. The game doesn't stop at any point and is constantly bringing in new nonsense to throw at you. And that nonsense hurts every single time. You don't find easy enemies in this game. Oh no. By no stretch of the imagination. And you know what? That's absolutely fantastic. Why is it fantastic? Because the combat feels so good. Everything has impact. When you get hit, you feel it. When you hit the enemy, you feel it. Even on larger enemy types, you're still able to smack them across the room. Not to mention, there are a series of special moves called roulette that I'll be able to show you once we get on to the final boss fight of this presentation. Roulette moves require a roulette card, and they briefly slow down the game as you pick one. A roulette move will do huge amounts of damage and is generally speaking, completely unavoidable for the enemy. This includes kicking people into orbit. Yes, you can do that. And you'll need it, because every now and again the game decides to throw one of these bastards at you. Yeah. So it turns out you're not just fighting normal guys or midgets or poison chihuahuas, you're also fighting demons. And they act like demons, they hurt like demons, and they fight like demons. They're incredibly difficult to kill, even this basic level. This is the easiest kind of demon in the game. These guys will kick the crap out of you. Generally speaking, it's best to use the God Hand to actually beat them down. Even then, it's not necessarily all that easy. And if you don't have God Hand, well, you'd best know what you're doing. Because if you get caught out by one of these guys, you're losing half your health, possibly even more. If you are on level die, which is the highest level of difficulty you can get to, that will scale all the way up past 3 to level die, then yeah, this game will destroy you. Demons will just kill you in one hit. You just can't let them hit you. It's absolutely absurd when you think about it, but it makes sense within the context of the game that is constantly saying to you, "Oi, you're the best fighter in the world, right? Well, prove it. Prove it, prove it, prove it." The game never lets up. Now, there's another thing that I really like about God Hand. Because most games try to do a lot. God Hand doesn't try to do a lot. God Hand does one thing, and it does one thing well, and that is brawling. It is entirely focused on beating the crap out of people. And that is all it does. It doesn't puzzle. It doesn't platform. Its level design is basic, to say the least. It's not a graphically impressive game, to the point where you can even see through some walls. It actually clips that way. It is by no means an impressive technical achievement. But that's okay. Because you know what? In a game about punching people, do I really want to be platforming? The answer is no. Do I really want to be solving puzzles? The answer is no. Do I want complex dialogue systems? Or a deep, meaningful plot? I think, honestly, in this scenario, the answer is most assuredly no, I do not. It does one thing, and it excels in it. More so than most. There are very few games that come close to this in terms of pure brawling action. It reminds me very much of old-school Streets of Rage. Taken into a third-person perspective, and then with the nonsense dialed up to 11. In fact, you can see the influence. The first boss that I showed you, that looks quite similar to several of the bosses that you saw in the Streets of Rage series, which were also entirely fine with presenting bosses in that way. It's a thematic throwback with modern gameplay mechanics, and it doesn't sacrifice on either. Maybe we should up the ante just a little bit. More often than not, the game will spring these large arena-based fights on you, whether they be optional in terms of the challenge system. There are these little fairies you can find throughout the world that will give you a challenge. If you can beat the challenge, then you'll gain a bunch of gold. Sometimes you'll gain some techniques and things like that as well. And every now and again, you'll go into a room, and it will be wave upon wave of progressively more difficult enemies coming at you 3 to 4 to maybe even 5 or 6 at a time. And these guys don't wait for you, by the way. I just want to point this out. They're not going to dance around you and wait. They are going to attack you if they get the opportunity to do so. You must divide and conquer as much as possible. Welcome to level 3 difficulty. And this gets really difficult. This is not the final level. Level die is the final level. I am not good enough at this stage to get there. And you know what? I'm okay with that. I really am. Because level die is ridiculous. You want to see someone play level die? There are some great playthroughs on YouTube. I believe the best one was actually done by Kung Fu Jesus of Something Awful. And I would highly recommend that you watch that. It is a nightmare. An absolute nightmare to stay out of the way of every attack coming in your direction. Because at this kind of level, they hurt. They hurt so, so very much. Good lord. Well, the midgets look easy, that's right. But what about the big guys at the end? Well, yeah, it gets a bit more stressful. There are very few companies that attempt to release games that are deliberately difficult. Most companies give you options to avoid the difficulty. This game really doesn't, per se. If you get better at it, it will get harder. And you could perhaps attribute some of its commercial failure to that level of difficulty. I just don't think the market was actually ready for it. I really don't. If a game like this was released today, then I think more people would be willing to play it. Thankfully, it's now also available on the PlayStation Store for $10, so you can actually experience this on your PlayStation 3 if you don't want to emulate or grab the disc for the PlayStation 2. I'll say this, it takes a lot of guts not to sacrifice your artistic vision in a game. It takes even more not to sacrifice your gameplay vision. If you envisioned an extremely hard brawler, then that is of course what you should present. But unfortunately, when you get commercial results like this, regardless of some critical acclaim but not enough, then it's very easy to see why publishers will say, do not make your game this difficult. Because if you do, it will fail. Just like I am right here. These guys aren't messing around. These are just two fairly tough enemies on level 1 of the game. Yeah, far more comes. That I can guarantee. Speaking of far more, let's skip ahead to the final boss fight of this presentation and show you just a little bit more about why you should care about God Hand.
Finally, a boss fight.
This little huevon is the God Hand. Oh, that's rich. A la mierda.
What's the matter? You on a tight budget, big guy?
You know what? I'm getting a bit hungry, and a little huevon sounds like it would hit the spot.
You need to feed your brain, not your ass.
I hope you fight half as good as you talk, cabron.
Find out for yourself.
Yeah! I don't think you realize what you're getting yourself into, pendejo!
Newsflash, big guy. You can wax on, wax off all you like. I'm still kicking your ass.
Some describe that as bad dialogue, and they would be right. It's terrible dialogue, intentionally so. I just have to watch the cutscenes in this game just because of the nonsense that goes on within them. You've got these incredibly over-the-top characters. This is only one form of this gigantic, demonic, Mexican kung fu guy who you will be encountering throughout the game. He doesn't mess around, which is why you can't mess around with him either. Learning the various boss attacks, knowing what the telegraphs are, knowing what their usual behavior is vitally important when it comes to beating them, and that's a refreshingly old-school kind of take on game mechanics. You've got bosses that are highly challenging, bosses that actually feel like bosses. They're either absurd, monstrous, or both. It's an unusual combination, mashing up of themes in a way that most games really don't dare. The idea of absurd comedy, adult themes, and brutal difficulty. There are very few companies that are willing to go down that route. And Platinum Games has actually demonstrated since that they are one of them with games like Mad World and perhaps most importantly Bayonetta, a game that could be considered by some to be something of a spiritual sequel to God Hand, even though the mechanics are nowhere near the same. The idea of absurd humor and character design, almost what I call a fetishized aesthetic. And then brutal difficulty relying purely on your skill, no nonsense, and focus, of course, on the core gameplay mechanics.
Get ready, cause I'm really gonna give it to you! Hey, you're the big nice hero, right? How about giving me a hand here?
Huh?
Come on!
Oh, I'll help you out all right.
¡A la mierda! He really gave it to me, all right.
See you around, fat boy.
Ladies and gentlemen, submitted for your approval, God Hand. One of the most focused games you will ever find. Betting the farm, essentially, on game mechanics, which unfortunately did not carry it through to commercial success. But fear not, you can still play this game. It is available on PlayStation Network for $10 or your regional equivalent. It works just fine on PlayStation 3. It's an ugly game, in many senses of the word. but my god, does it do so many things right. I think if Clover Studios had to go out on any game, this was the most appropriate one for it to happen with, and it's a very good thing indeed that their legacy continues with Platinum Games. If you have a few spare controllers you need smashing, then look no further than God Hand, ladies and gentlemen. Give it a try, get your ass kicked, rage on the first level. Trust me, stick with it, it feels very, very good indeed. My name's been TotalBiscuit, and this is why we can't have nice things. I'll see you next time.